Okay, well, first of all, it means a lot to me personally to be invited by CFA Calgary and also the 51, two of my favorite organizations in the whole world and favorite people. So thank you so much. I'm going to take maybe 15, 20 minutes today and just share the highlights of the research report released on March 8th in Stockholm a week ago, last Monday. Seems like forever ago, but it wasn't. So this was an amazing year for me because of a lot of reasons, like everyone. But what I did was I interviewed 58 really smart women around the world, and I asked them only one question, and that question was, what is the best investing success story you've ever had? And I got answers all over the map, as you can imagine. So this idea to do the rich thinking on the investing success stories came about early in February when I was actually at live financial salons that I created in Denmark and Turkey. And I was trying something out as an experiment. I had 8 to 10 women in little cafes, and I was telling them to brag. I was asking them to brag. Could you brag about your investing success? I wanted to see what would happen if you had women doing that, because I'd never experienced that before. And it was very interesting because it took a while and it took some poking and prodding from me to get them to tell their stories. But once we got rolling, we ended up having a lot of fun. Most of us were in hysterics the whole time. And there was some incredible success stories. So from that experience, I had planned on continuing these financial salons in person around the world, but of course that didn't happen. So I took that kind of feeling in the salon and tried to make it my research topic for the year. And here we go. So the pandemic certainly shaped a lot of things. I mean, as a researcher, now I had to do everything by Zoom. So there's only a handful of the 58 interviews that were done in person earlier in the year. Zoom ended up being just fine, as it did for a lot of things. And so I was actually pretty surprised about all of that. And another way that the pandemic sort of played out was with these success stories themselves. A lot of the women that I spoke with had what I'd call pandemic plays. So they were taking advantage of things that were going on, investing in e-bikes, e-commerce, web conferencing, video shopping technologies, all of this stuff. And particularly when the market crashed at the end of March, or corrected, let's say, some of these women said, let's not let a good crisis go to waste. And they started investing all their cash. And that was a success story in and of itself. So before I get started sharing some of the stories, I'm going to share the demographics of the people that I interviewed, just so you have an idea. I'm always after diversity. I like to interview women of different ages, different personality types, in different countries, from different backgrounds and professions, so that I get a little bit of everything. And that maybe when people are reading the report, somebody's going to resonate with them maybe more than another based on their own background or whatever it is. So it turned out that of the 58 women, over half of them were in their 40s, and about a fifth in their 30s, about another fifth in their 50s, a smattering in their 60s, and a smattering in their 20s. And I don't go about picking them out in terms of who I want to interview. I operate by the process of serendipity, which is the most fun way to work in my view. That simply means if I'm traveling to Istanbul, I ask my community, which is now very big because I've interviewed close to 900 women around the world over the last decade. I just say, hey, I'm going to Istanbul. Does anyone know a smart and interesting woman that I should interview when I get there? And I've never been lost in that approach. Women are always so supportive and willing to help me find smart women to interview. So every year the collection takes on a life of its own. I never know who it's going to be or what it's going to look like, which is great. The age of the interviewees this year, we had this is a different slide. I asked them all, what age were you when you started working? Just because I was curious, because particularly in the Nordic countries, they seem to start work at age 12 or 13. It's really fun. And I didn't know if that was the case all around the world. It certainly isn't. But in terms of the global selection that I had of the 58 women, half of them did start working under the age of 20. So that's quite telling, I think. By region, I had about 50% of the women in Europe, including the Nordics. I had about 30% in North America, South America, Southeast Asia, 14%, and then the Middle East and Africa. I got to go to some places I don't normally get to. I went to Riyadh, for example, which I might not have felt comfortable going in person. I went to Kenya for a few interviews this year, and Shanghai, where I'd never been before, although I've been to China. In terms of the professions, again, because I'm asking my community to send me smart and interesting women, the fact that I'm in the finance industry, it would easily be skewed to all women in finance. So I have to fight hard against that. I get introduced to so many cool people, but I have to try to keep it down to a dull roar, if you will, with the women in actually working in finance professions. So this year, I limited it to a quarter in the finance arena, private equity or whatever. So we want representation, but not 100%. And then otherwise, they were all in different industries. I had film producers, I had bookstore owners, I had social workers, I had media people, marketing, fintech, engineers, all kinds of stuff. So we're getting the full gamut. In terms of what was your best investing success story, I grouped it into categories. By far, the number one category was equities, equity funds, or equity ETFs. So 42% of the 58 women gave me a story in that asset class. Second in line was real estate, lots of women flipping houses for fun and profit. And then we had a third place with startups, private equity, and venture capital. Then women starting their own businesses, and then other, which in this case, in the book, if you're reading it, you'll notice some of them were currency trading to make a success story, and some were investing in art or collectibles of one form or another. In terms of an interesting look at, do women change careers? These smart women, 58 of them, over half of them said they do extensive travel normally for either personal or business. And 43% said that they have actually moved cities for their career, specifically for their career along the way. And over half of them said they've changed career entirely at least once. And it was really interesting because this year, for some reason, I had several women who'd either changed from finance to arts or from arts to finance. So it seems like we're using both sides of our brain here and capable of lots of different careers if we open our minds to it. So I'm going to share 6 little stories just to give you a flavor of the fun job that I have with these interviews. And I encourage you all to read the full paper because it's so inspiring. Of course, I only share positive stories because I'm trying to share positive messages about women and money. So this woman, Linda Watson, is a famous opera singer in Vienna. And I would normally never have been able to meet her except for the pandemic. I was referred to her and I decided, oh, well, I'll contact her, but I don't know how I'd ever get this woman who's usually performing 4 nights a week in the opera. And she said, yeah, I'll have an interview. I've got nothing to do. I'm looking for people to talk to. She was sitting around like the rest of us. So it was a very fascinating opportunity for me. And in terms of her investing success, Linda told me that she said, well, she gets paid extremely well. She's performing most of the year 4 nights a week, places like the Met, the Opera Bastille, the Vienna State Opera, all over the place. And she said, you can't really control how much money you make every year, but she would just throw it all in a big pot and the money would start to add up quickly. Sounds like a great problem to have to me. Her advisor, she actually was a broker, that's a long story, in a previous life, but her current investment advisor had always given her this advice of whatever you do, don't get greedy. Well, she told me that despite this intention not to get greedy, her advisor decided to buy her some Zoom stock in December of 2019. And well, the rest is history on that one. So her return, we didn't quantify it, but you probably all know that that stock's done really, really good. Really well, I should say. Jessica Wu, okay, this is a funny story. I, as a CFA charter holder, have been involved in the research challenge for CFA Institute. I was a judge in Israel a couple of years ago. Great experience. It's a global competition. And I happened to notice on LinkedIn that a woman named Jessica Wu in China she was in Australia, Jessica Wu had won, she was 20 years old and she won the research challenge for CFA Australia. So I decided to reach out to her. I don't usually work without a referral, but I was so proud of this young woman. I just sent her a note on LinkedIn and I said, hey, congratulations, would you be interested in being interviewed for Rich Thinking? And she said, yes, of course I would, I'd love it. And then while I was searching for Jessica Wu, I was struck by this other woman, this photograph here. She has a violin in the full picture. And I thought, well, she looks like an interesting person. So I went with my gut feel and I contacted her as well. She's in Shanghai. So the bottom line here is I have two Jessica Wus in this year's Rich Thinking, and they're completely different people, of course. They look completely different. One's in Australia and one's in China. But my designer had a lot of trouble. He kept putting their photographs with the wrong story, and I have to spend hours and hours editing these things every year. So that made it a little bit more challenging. Anyway, this Jessica Wu was a young actress. She'd won an acting competition. She's very beautiful and she's musical, but she decided that acting really didn't satisfy her intellectual need whatsoever. And watching China's economy grow, she started to develop a passion for the investment industry. And she watched asset management and she decided, I'm going to shift my career and move to England to study finance. And now she's still pretty young. She said her best investment success was earlier in 2020. She invested in Pinduoduo, which is a Chinese e-commerce platform. And her rate of return last year was 264%. I think that qualifies as a big win. Wow. Now, one thing I did a little bit differently this year as well was once the pandemic started, I was getting some emails and calls from people that I've met around the world. A lot of younger women worrying about their career. Should they change their career? Their job looked a lot differently on Zoom. How are they going to get ahead? All of that kind of stuff. And I welcomed these calls, but it occurred to me that I should be offering a service because I was less busy. Two of my research contracts were put on hold for a few months. So I thought, I'm going to offer this financial advice hotline, which is a 30-minute free confidential Zoom conversation about finances. This ended up being really popular. I also advertised it in one of the publications that I write for. And I ended up I'm still doing some of these, close to 80 30-minute Zoom calls. Interestingly, a lot of men took me up on this offer as well. So I learned a lot, and over time, I'll be publishing some of these findings. But one of the women that called up was Bichat Araya, who I didn't realize she's quite a famous singer in Stockholm, pop singer. And she said that, typically artists and musicians aren't known for being very good with their finance or saving their money. And she hadn't been either. But she said that at the end of March, also as her career was kind of put on hold for a while too, performances, she decided after talking to a friend who had an investment app that maybe she would take advantage of that big dip and get a feel for stock prices, start using the app. And she said, I learned something about myself. I love trading. So wow, just getting a feel for it without trying to be over-educated, she got into it. And I mean, it's pretty addictive when you start making big money quickly too. So we had that opportunity this year. And she said, in just a few weeks, I made 30% on Volvo and 50% on Bambuser, which is a Swedish startup that works with live video shopping technology. And so she said, I'm trying not to get too cocky here because she made over 60% in a year as a complete novice investor. Libby Armstrong, I talked to, she's in Australia. Somebody in Singapore said to me, you must talk to this woman. She spent her entire career in the communications part of the finance industry, but her lifelong dream had always been to open her own bookshop. When she was a kid, she would go in and just be fascinated and spend hours and hours in bookshops. So one day, because of her investing decision, she ended up becoming her bookshop owner. It was back in the days of SARS. Remember that? 2003, she was living in Hong Kong, and she said the real estate market was at the lowest point it had been in decades. Everyone thought they were dying. Everybody had lost their confidence. That sounds familiar. And she said she and her husband bought an apartment at the bottom of the market, and they decided to live in the apartment. And also it was an income generating asset because they had rental units, and they were able to quadruple their purchase price. But the story gets better from there, because then with the proceeds of that house sale, she bought a commercial building, and where she could finally house that dream bookshop. And she also earns income from 2 other properties. And within 6 months, she had a huge appreciation in that investment. Unfortunately, my screen's blocked. I can't remember the number, but I think it was over 100%. Wild. In Singapore, a very well-respected private equity investor is Shin Ee, who was referred to me through a contact there. And she is just so fun on Zoom. I have to tell you, this woman was a giggler, well, is a giggler. And it was one of the funniest conversations I'd ever had, because she seems so straightforward and sophisticated, yet she burst into laughter every 3 minutes for some reason. So it had me giggling as well. And it reminded me of those financial salons where we all ended up in hysterics. And I wonder if it's just kind of a nervous reaction, maybe talking about ourselves and bragging, because we're not socialized to do such a thing, and we end up laughing instead, which is fun, but it makes you wonder about the whole thing. Anyway, Shin Ee said to her, as a successful private equity investor, investing isn't just about returns. It's about the excitement of finding a really good founder and a team that has a lot of potential. And she said her best investment ever was in a China-focused startup called Lala Move. And they're a last mile logistics company, and they operate in over 80 cities in China. And she supported them in the very early days, and now the valuation is over a couple of $2 billion. But she got totally excited when she was talking about the founder, whose name is Xing Chao. He had come from a very poor family in Hong Kong, and she knew him in university. And he had, she said, tremendous tenacity. After university, he ended up becoming a professional poker player. And she just always loved his determined spirit. And that was what attracted to him as an investor. And the rest is history on that story. Anna Maj, some of you may know because she keeps appearing as #1 fintech leader globally. She's on LinkedIn every single day. I had the good fortune to meet her in Warsaw 2 years ago. I presented my research for CFA Society Poland, and Anna and I were on a panel together, and we hit it off like a house on fire, and we've kept in touch ever since. So I decided to ask her my question this year: what's your best investing success? And she talked about art always having been her passion. And she's slowly over the years built her art collection, basically not about making money, but just interest in the art itself and buying pieces that she valued from an emotional perspective rather than worrying about the financial side of it. But she did sort of fluke into something. She said 5 years ago, she bought a drawing from a really well-known Polish artist that was a portrait of a woman resembling a Japanese girl in a kimono. And she said she just fell in love with the piece of art, bought it, and 3 years later, she said somebody else loved it even more and bought it from her for triple the price. So good deal on something that she didn't expect to even make money on. I heard a lot of those stories. They were a little bit fluky, so not all of them were well thought out. You can make money no matter what. So I'm going to share now my own investing success story because I want Shelley to share hers. I'm just trying to egg her on to do so. So in 2020, true story, my husband is a tech analyst, and he's Deloitte's tech research leader. Works for Deloitte Global, so I probably know a little bit more about technology in the sector than a lot of people, but maybe we all do now through osmosis and just the way we live our lives. But I overhear a lot of things, and I thought, you know what? I'm not allowed to buy individual stocks because I'm married to a Deloitte partner. For compliance reasons, we can't. But I thought, I have a feeling that during this pandemic and after, the tech sector is probably going to do quite well. So I bought the NASDAQ ETF, the QQQ, and I piled a lot of money into it of my own portfolio. Please do not do what I say or do what I do or listen to me in this way. I have a super high risk tolerance. I don't know why. I always have. I love trading. So I just got kind of excited about it and put a lot of my portfolio in the QQQ. And I had this trading strategy. I thought I wanted to pamper myself during the pandemic. We all needed a little bit of pampering. And I thought, okay, what I'm going to do is I will keep my original investment amount. And every time it goes up by 5%, I'll take those profits off the table and spend them on luxury items so I can have some guilt-free spending on luxuries. This ended up working out incredibly well. So I was constantly having this money off the table, and I would buy things like Joe Malone body lotion, which I love, which is super expensive. And I'm really a big chocolate lover. I was talking to my friends here earlier that I run 10K a day, but I also eat chocolate every single day. And I have this special Swiss chocolate that I love that I used to buy in Zurich and bring it home with me. Couldn't get to Zurich this year, but Googled Laderac, which is the place I buy it from, and it turns out they have a place in Toronto now. So I'm ordering in Laderac, big box of chocolate arrives on my doorstep once a month. I'm loving it. Oh, I was up 75% last year. That's my brag on that NASDAQ ETF. I'm still holding it. We'll see what happens. So the moral of my story is more money equals more chocolate, women. Look at that chocolate. So good. Now I'm going over to Shelley Kuipers. And Shelley is a little bit shy to tell her story, but read the whole story. Her background is amazing. Her background, she was so honest to talk to me about it, having to conform, not wanting to conform, all of that. I think some of us have been there, probably all of us in one way or another. But Shelley, would you like to share what your best investing success story was?
Yeah, there's a few very different ones. I think we talked about the public markets, Barbara, when we chatted on my interview. And one of the investments that I was really excited about last year in particular was Shopify. And so bought in on that stock earlier. And I think, we've all seen the run that Shopify has done over the past year. And so
it's Canadian, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's Canadian. It's a public stock. I love it because it's the antithesis of Amazon. It's like I get angry when I buy from Amazon, and sometimes I do. But I love how Shopify is like the opposite, right? It's like everyone can have their own store and they empower the individual retailer or entrepreneur. So I think if I look at last year, 2020, it was definitely Shopify. I love the story, and it turned out to be a very good investment.
Did you sell it?
Yeah, too early, but
you still probably made a lot.
Yeah, exactly. But
so what was your return? We have to brag here. What was your return?
I think it was at least 5 times in the period that we owned it. So and I should just clarify too, like our family invests together, so it's really cool. So it's my husband and my 2 sons and now our daughter-in-law. So we kind of work together to figure out what we're going to invest in, whether it's a venture investment or whether it's a public market stock.
Love it.
Yeah.
Thanks. So that's about all I wanted to say. I will say though, let's keep the conversation going. And what I mean by that is I do write for 3 different publications monthly. So I'm always looking for ideas. I'm always looking for people to interview. If you think there are smart and interesting women anywhere in the world, diverse backgrounds ideally. I post stories on my favorite topic, women in finance. So follow me on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. If you want dog photos, Instagram, I put up a lot of Bernese Mountain Dog photos. Otherwise, it's just, contact me with any questions, and I'm happy to still do those 30-minute confidential Zoom financial hotline calls for anybody who is interested. I'll move it over.
I love that. So everyone make note. I can't wait to see the lineup to your hotline after this
I'm
session.
in trouble now.
I'm sure there's going to be lots of people who want to talk with you.
All good research.
Yeah. That was excellent. Thank you so much for sharing the research. And like you said, right, I think it's like a decade you've interviewed 900 women.
11 years now.
Yeah.
That was my 11th publication.
That was your 11th, right? So 11 years. And you talked a little bit about how you got this all started, but can you just dive into that a little bit more? Like, how did it start? And then, how did you start picking up momentum? Was it something that, you kind of discovered that, women actually really wanted to talk about this and maybe they didn't have a vehicle to share their stories?
Yeah, so it started in the financial crisis, and I was working as a portfolio manager with high net worth entrepreneurs. And I'd been in the industry a long time by then, but I started getting kind of down, like a lot of people. I mean, first of all, my own income had been cut dramatically because we got paid based on assets under management, and the market values were falling rapidly. And I didn't really like that. But the worse than the financial hit was that my customers didn't want to talk to me. And it wasn't personal, it's just that they were upset and they were dealing with all the changes in their own households. And what I noticed during that time, and my firm wasn't doing any worse than any other, but it was like minus 15% or something, and people are not wanting to even look at their investment statements. I felt just like I can't add any value here. Like this is out of my control. And I remember even my mom at the time said, "But darling, it's not your fault." Remember, but I always wanted positive reinforcement with my work. Like any normal person, you need some positive feedback, and I was getting zero. So what happened is I started reading and I became really introverted. And I had noticed during that period that some of my female clients, and I had about half and half, I dealt with a lot of entrepreneurial couples. Some women, some men were the leaders in the relationships. It was about, in terms of the financial discussion, it was about even. But I noticed that the 7 phone calls I had right at the market bottom when people wanted to cash out because they'd had enough, March 9th or something, they were all made by men to me. And they had just like were panicked. And I really had to earn my money that day. By the way, I talked everyone out of them cashing out, and they thanked me after, but I had to give it all I had. I was wiped by the end of that day, and I really believed in what I was saying, but it was all so psychological. This is a long way of getting the answer to why I started Rich Thinking, but the women were more ones calling me going, are you okay? Like, how are you managing through this? Like, we're okay. Don't worry so much. We're happy. We're going to keep our portfolio intact. And I thought, well, what the hell? Why do I keep hearing all these myths when I'm reading about women are risk averse and women aren't interested in investing and women defer their authority to their brothers or their men, husbands rather. And all of that got perpetuated in everything I read on bank websites, research houses putting out papers about women lacking confidence. And I just got really, really angry. And I'm sitting around going, what am I going to do about it? I'm a chartered financial analyst. What can I use this designation for that would help the greater good? Because nobody cares about CFA designation during a financial crisis. So it came to me. I was out on one of my runs and this light bulb went off, and I just went, well, the best way to counter negative messages is with positive messages. And I think it's going to be someone like me that has to do this, that can be independent and that can share some positive messages. So I had to clear compliance with the firm I was working with. I gave them my idea that I'd interview 50 highly accomplished women around the world and share positive stories. They liked it. I don't think they thought I was actually going to do it, but I did it. And I published my first report in 2010. And from there, what happened was just amazing, and just the power of supportive women and media and the community wanting to share the positive messages. So I ended up being Googled after my first paper came out, and I was one of the few women writing on women in finance, especially with this new bent in the messaging. And so NASDAQ Sweden, a woman there was organizing a women's event for 2,000. Ladies' night at the stock exchange. She said, can we fly you over business class and you can talk about your paper? Of course. I was terrified. I hadn't done that much public speaking at that point, but luckily it was a fantastic experience. My speech went really well. The women were all pumped up. I ended up being invited to NASDAQ Copenhagen, Reykjavik, and Helsinki. And from there were people in the audience that, like one woman said she was PR for an internet bank, and she said, I agreed with every word you said. I agreed with every single word you said. Please come and speak at this other thing with 3,000 people. And it just kind of took off from there. And then CFA Institute in 2015 liked my paper that year, which was The Future of Women in Finance. And they put it on their website. And I really felt so supported. And then better yet, they started sending me around the world to speak to all the different CFA societies. And I did over 5 years, over 100 keynotes in really cool cities and countries, and got to see the world that way. So I'm really grateful to the CFA Institute.
Yeah, it's amazing. I love it. I love it how your research got started, and now it has so much momentum. And at the 51, we always refer to that statement, right? Women aren't risk averse, they're risk aware. And it's such a powerful statement, right? It's really a bit of a mind shift to go, yeah, like that's what we are, right? And there's now even data that's coming out of 2020, right? It's probably related to some of your research around, women are leading the charge on the investing side, right? They're driving great returns. And so, it's our time, I keep saying. When you look back at last year's research, Barbara, what was kind of the, maybe the thing that really stood out in the research across everyone that you interviewed, or, something really surprising or shocking?
I think the thing I was most shocked by, because when I was doing those little financial salons in person, it was a bit difficult getting the women at the table to brag, because they're pretty self-conscious, and especially like a group of women, and they didn't know each other. So I was inviting diverse people to those things.
Yeah.
That I thought this investing success question, it would be more difficult than it was to get answers from the 58 women. So it's not like I had to go out and ask 500 women to get 50 answers of investing successes. I asked exactly 58 women, and I got exactly 58 investing success stories. So what does that tell you? Because I didn't pick those women, right? So if we push a little bit, and if we're persistent, we will get the success story. And there's a lot of information in that, I think.
I think that's awesome. You alluded to this before, but I want to dig into it again. You talked about, bragging. What have you seen have been the differences between men and women and how they communicate or talk to their investing approach or their investment philosophy? So, earlier you're like, come on, Shell, like tell your story. So give us the goods on that.
Well, I haven't ever done any research on men, so I have to preface it as that. So I'm only an expert on women and money. However, as I said, I did work as a portfolio manager for a long, long time, over 20 years, and I dealt with couples, men, women, whatever. So from that experience, I can say that certainly the men were more focused on bottom line investment returns, rather than communicating in a way that would tell the story more of the company that they were invested in. They seem to be less interested in that. However, having said that, I think that's based on the fact that the industry is set up that way, and that I don't even think it was the men's fault. I think they felt like they had to be the guy taking charge and asking these questions about bottom line returns. And they didn't know it was a possibility that you could hear an interesting story about a company, because nobody was doing it. The whole industry would communicate in a very boring way using just charts and graphs and PE ratios, and people would be half asleep listening to it, but that's what they thought they were supposed to listen to. And so I think the nice dark secret in all of this, shifting the communication in a style that appeals to women with stories, also appeals to a lot of men, and I have had that feedback. I got an email yesterday from one of the readers of my Portfolio Confidential column, which was in Canadian Money Saver magazine. And he just wrote and said, thank you. You're changing the way that we're thinking about how we can communicate investing. This is really, really important. And as I said, a lot of men have called on this confidential hotline. So I think we're making it more welcoming to both genders, which is really what we want with gender equality. So everybody can benefit from better communication. And I love that, because it's not like saying men are no good at this or they're completely different. We're not all that different. In fact, a good friend of mine is a criminology lawyer, and she's trained in sociology. And her favorite expression is, there are more differences within gender than there are between gender. Does that make sense?
I love that. Yeah, it is. And it's really powerful. So it's this idea of, if we shape how we communicate the investing opportunity and the investing process and what that looks like, in doing that, we're actually reshaping it that benefits everyone. So it doesn't just benefit us as women, right?
Exactly.
So again, it's just, maybe designing by women for everyone.
Love it.
Okay. So
that's a good slogan. You should write that down.
Yeah, we have written that one down.
Okay.
But we have a ton of questions coming in. So I feel like we need to shift and get some of these questions answered, Barbara. And I wanted to say, we might not get through all of the questions today, but we're definitely committed to like post-event communications where we'll note all the questions that have been asked, and we'll make sure that, Barbara or the CFA Institute or the 51, kind of chimes in and provides commentary and answers to these questions. So,
and actually, I'll just interject and say, if there's a lot of questions, please do write in or write to me directly, or whoever, because I can always write an article for CFA Institute, because I write for them every month, about what the questions were and answer them.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm just going back through the chat here. There's one question from Debbie. Hey, Barbara, it would be interesting to know if you follow or would consider following the stories of these women to see how they do over time, like say over a 5-year period. Have you ever done that? Have you ever done kind of like reconciliation of past stories with current time?
That's such a great idea. It hadn't occurred to me. I do it informally because I stay in touch with most of these people. This is the beauty of social media. I don't know what we would do without LinkedIn. So everybody that I've ever interviewed, I'm still connected with. It's hard to, have meaningful discussions with close to 900 women, every week or something. But there's every way I could reach out again to these people and follow up. What a great idea.
Yeah, you could do like a.
Hopefully they're good stories, or I'm not sharing them.
Exactly. Maybe it's like an anniversary report or something.
Yeah.
There's another question. How does your family navigate the family investment decision making? That might have been directed to me. Yeah, it's really interesting. It's a little bit of both. It's kind of like somebody really has to say that this investment needs to happen, and the rest of the family rallies around them. So it's like it's a collective, but it's also requires people, kind of putting their money at risk and standing behind that investment decision. So that's how it works for us. It's still very informal, but it's a ton of fun.
You have to present a case for a stock purchase. And how old are your kids?
My boys are, well, they're not boys anymore, 31 and 24. Yeah, so it's great. We actually have an ongoing chat together where we're constantly talking about investment opportunities and who's on to what and why and what's the thesis and what's the business case or the investing case. It's a lot of fun.
And what tool do you use? What kind of an app do you use?
Well, we use Telegram, and sometimes we use iMessage, but yeah, it's pretty free form, but it's really good because we're all in different places. So it's a great way to keep in touch. Love it. Here's another question. We know that women aren't investing as much as men. So let's clarify that. And I want to know your opinion on that. And then how do you advise a first-time investor to take their first step into the market?
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, I think it's a myth that women are not investing as much as men. And I mean, there's a ton of different ways you can skew data, right? So I'm not going to go into that. But let me start with facts from the US equity market, because that's probably what most people can relate to. And 20 years ago, I mean, historically, yes, there was a huge gender investing gap. And I have this data, if anybody wants it, from Gallup polls. 20 years ago, 60% of men were investing in the US equity market, and 40% of women were investing in the US equity market. So a 20-point gap, that's rather large. So that's where that myth, with it's no longer a myth, it's sort of been perpetuated. It was real. It's not now. So financial crisis numbers, that gap narrowed significantly. In 2008, 65% of men were investing in the US market and 59% of women. So that gap had narrowed to 6% from that 20%. Today, I do not have current data. I have 2018. It was still at 6%, exactly the same, even through all those different markets, but it had not widened. It had maintained the 6% gap. I would be fully surprised if we haven't actually closed it right now in the US equity market. And I'm waiting for new data from Gallup, and I think it'll be incredible to see, because this pandemic has accelerated women investing. Two things have happened. One, the explosion in the ESG space, and we've seen the numbers of the fund flows into ESG changing the entire industry. Every firm is now struggling, grappling with, oh my God, we need an ESG policy. No one's going to invest in our funds anymore. It's true. And so women are leading the sustainability gap, if you want, and insisting on investing in good causes, good companies. And then the other thing is we've also seen a massive uptick in women starting investing. The Financial Times reported this. I wrote about it in a CFA article a month or two ago, that all of these social trading platforms that are so appealing to women because they communicate, they allow for sharing portfolios, different communication styles that didn't even used to exist. Share your portfolio, share your stories, talk stocks in a way that you want to with women that are like-minded in different groups of all abilities. This has been huge. And the numbers during the pandemic, most of the major platforms like eToro or Nutmeg in the UK, eToro's in Israel. In fact, they're doing a big offering today or merger with another firm. So like up 40%. Female investors across the board around the world, not just in one place, on these trading platforms. So a lot of us were sitting at home with not as much to do, and we decided to start investing. What a great idea. Maybe we'd always meant to, but we were too busy running things back and forth to the office or whatever. But now we had actual time to sit down and review our finances, get more comfortable, and just get started if we hadn't already got started investing. And the second part of that question about what would I advise is what I always advise is just get started. It's don't try and learn anything. Actually, you don't need to know anything. You just need common sense. And if you can't think of what to buy, I mean, open your trading account. It's got to be your own trading account. And don't put all your money in it. Put a small amount, but it has to be real money or you won't get the feel for it. So even if it's $100, open your trading account and buy a stock or two or three, and don't worry about what they are, because the point of the exercise is practice, because hands-on practice is what builds knowledge and it builds confidence investing. And I've seen it over and over and over again. Women, even with the stories this year, they were complete novices and they got confident instantly because they started to see results. And even if you lose money, it's okay because you haven't put all your money in it, but you're just getting a feel for buying and selling. And if you can't think of what to buy, just buy a product that's around your house that you use every day.
I always say that too. I love it, right?
Colgate,
it's kind of like, yeah, exactly. It's kind of like, yeah, what are those products or those services that you like? It's kind of like we heard the Zoom story earlier, right? You are surrounded by different products all the time, right? And so putting your money in them just kind of makes logical sense, especially the ones that you really like and admire. And that coupled with, the advice that you're getting from someone can be kind of a good way to diversify what you're investing in. But I love, a woman's instinct around, what brands and products do they love and can they put their money to work as an investor in those brands and companies. We have there's so many questions, oh my gosh. Gurjeet just posed a question. How have your conversations with women in their 20s been different from others?
Oh, that's really nice. First of all, I love talking with women in their 20s because they don't even know what I'm talking about with these myths and stereotypes. They weren't really around for that because most of them had mums who were sort of on the cusp of the generation, and they weren't necessarily like meek, mild women hiding in the background, not investing. A lot of 20-year-olds have had a mom talk to them about investing, and that's really refreshing for me because I didn't used to hear that ever. So that's number one. I think right out of the gate, they're already kind of gender equal in terms of the investing thing. They don't really think there's an issue. And that if they want to start investing, they just do the same way a dude would, right? Like it's not a big deal. So it's whether or not they feel like it. It's much different.
Yeah, I love that. So you and I were bantering back and forth on some of these other questions, and I'm seeing some of them kind of pop up here too. So it's like, you know, there's advice for the millennial women or the Gen Z or Gen X like myself. You know, we've kind of talked about, you know, just get started, you know, buy a stock or stocks. And these mobile investing platforms make it so simple. Also too, I'm just kind of seeing there's another question here around, you mentioned that the traditional narrative off the mark of seeing places to note millennial and Gen Z have also shifted to becoming more conservative than the members of Gen X or boomers. Have you found that as well? Or is there a gender split to this as well? So are you seeing a difference between Gen Z and millennial versus Gen X and the boomers? You kind of talked to that a little bit already around, you know, this younger generation don't even notice. They just dive in, right? Because they're being coached by their mothers or their aunts.
The other thing I'll
say,
the other thing I'll say is I think because I do this research, people think I do a lot of quantitative stuff like that, like banks would with attribution surveys. And I tend to stay away from that because my bent is sharing positive, diverse stories. So I don't tend to track a lot of that data. I could probably source it for anybody who's interested by generations, but that's sort of not where I go with my day and my time. I tend to do qualitative interviews, and the demographic that I interview is just one demographic, which is, it cuts across all ages and generations. It's this smart and interesting woman. That can mean a lot of women. I mean, I think we're all smart and interesting, but the ones that I interview have to have positive stories. And the reason for that is because I want to inspire everyone else. So I'm not interviewing everyone, or I'd probably have some negative stories too. So this is, I just want to make that clear because I'm not doing the full gamut. I'm doing these like really well-educated, really accomplished people.
Yeah, great. We talked about the mobile platforms. What are some of the mobile platforms that you think are providing a really good experience for, you know, women to get started, or, you know, maybe you're already an investor, but what are the platforms that you think are really good that we should be checking out?
Well, I wrote a whole article on this, and I am global, and I think everybody can be global. That's the beauty of this. We don't have to stick to Canada. I mean, there's some regulatory issues, but there are some incredibly cool platforms elsewhere. And if you are interested in the article on my site, which is barbarastewart.ca, there's a section called Articles by Barbara, and one of them is CFA Institute articles. And if you click on that, one of them that will pop up is something to do with 4 trends in women's online trading. And I go through the coolest ways to trade around the world. And there's a bunch of different sites. And you can belong to these social trading communities, even if you don't live in Denmark. That's the beauty of today. So you may not be able to open an account there, but you can have conversations, thanks to Google Translate. I belong to all these different communities, and I just check in and I see what people are asking each other, and I translate if it's in Singapore or whatever language they're talking. And I can add my comments if I feel like it, like anybody else. But then I can get my stock ideas from these people and go and open, like it could be any bank trading account here. Doesn't really matter. So I think the platform question, make sure that you're open-minded, because there are far more advanced platforms for women outside of Canada. I don't have one I feel strongly about in Canada, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
Except for the 51, but I don't think you have.
I know, exactly. We're working on that. Okay, so I know we're almost going to wrap up here. I think there's a macro trend that we really need to impart on the audience, and it's the wealth transfer in Canada. So I imagine most of our viewers today are from Canada. And, you know, we've noted in the research that we've done at 51 that, you know, 65% of Canadian wealth will be in the hands of women in this decade or by the end of the decade. So we're on a journey, all of us as women. It's going to be massively transformational to the financial services industry, to what's being invested in, to, you know, developing financial acumen. You know, what would you say is your advice to us as a community of women and men? And if we have the opportunity to design what we want to see or invest in what we want to see, what's your advice to us as these future and now in hand investors over the decade?
I think it's just more important. I mean, the whole topic of my research this year, Hear Me Roar, is about sharing our voices and speaking up. And we may not have been socialized to do so. It's hard for all of us, I think. It doesn't come easy to anyone to brag or even to, you know, do something a little bit different that maybe you haven't done. But I think as a community, what you're doing, which I love, is making it normal to talk about investing, whether we're men or women, in a way that makes sense to the person and their unique needs. So we're all individuals here, right? And I love the women's sharing, but the men would love to share too. And I think if we could do more events together, it's just a beautiful thing. And I think we're getting close to that rather than having this sort of gender split. I'm optimistic that we're on a trend in that direction. And yeah, I would just encourage everybody, just invest and talk about investing. And that's the action that's needed. And it becomes normal from there for everyone.
Yeah. Well, obviously I wanted to thank you, Barbara, so much for your research and your stories and your perspective. Have a fantastic day.